We are having a great time, as you can see. Lots of smiles and lots of stories. We are talking about harnessing the power of story to engage and influence audiences at the LMA. And this morning's session was pretty packed. We started at the beginning with what makes a story important. And we had... My name is Lynn Tellefsen Stehle. I have been a legal marketer for over 20 years. Seated beside me is Lindsay Griffiths, Executive Director of the International Lawyers Network. Seated beside her is Steve Cohen, Impact Litigator and Partner at Pollock, Cohen in New York. And on the other side of Steve is Adrian Lürssen, Co-Founder and Vice President of Strategy and Development at JD Supra. And earlier this morning, we gathered here at the LMA to discuss story and storytelling and how to use story to influence and engage audiences. And we focused on, we covered a lot, but we're going to focus on just the key takeaways, I think, some tactics, because we think that it's important as you go about legal marketing to consider these tactics. And we'll start with some from Lindsay.
Thanks, Lynn. So we talked about a lot of different things, but we focused on things like making sure that the audience is your focus, no matter what tactic you're using. So whatever type of content you're using, blogging, podcasting, video, making sure that the people that you're writing for or the publication that you're writing for, Steve will talk a little bit about that, is the focus of your content. And that's important because a lot of times when you're writing or when you're speaking, you're focusing on the law, and Adrian will talk about that a little bit, instead of making sure that the content that you're delivering is written for the audience that you're writing for or speaking for. So with that, I'll pass it over to Steve and let him talk a little bit about what he was talking about this morning.
Well, we try to get everyone in the firm to write and get published. Some people write blogs, other people try to get in legal publications, some people try to get in magazines and general issue newspapers. And the most important thing, as you just said, is understand the audience of that publication. Don't write for a publication a story that they have no interest in. Second, don't bury the lead. Keep it interesting. Get the point across. Engage the audience. Short sentences, not legalese. Make it accessible.
Periods.
Period. Right.
Periods.
And throw in lots of periods, not commas.
I'm a fan of the semicolon, but the point is well made. For people who aren't here, I would say that one of my big takeaways is read Lindsay's blog, Zen and the Art of Legal Networking. She spends an awful lot of time talking about storytelling in this space, and you should follow along. The other pleasure, having done this panel twice now, is getting to hear Steve's story, which for me, one of the key takeaways about something like this, like storytelling, is to make sure how you understand it fits into the space in which you work. Don't try to do something that you see happening outside of legal as a perfect fit, because it won't be. And Steve's stories, which I hope that you are able to somehow get your hands on, are stories of somebody who's wielding tools in service of an effective goal, strategically. And some people do things for the sake of doing them, and I've just appreciated your stories for the way in which they've been wielded to make a difference. Some of the things that I wanted to focus on that I've seen time and again, law firms and lawyers are very good at focusing on the law, where more often than not, they should be focusing on the ways in which the law impacts the people they're trying to serve. That's a pretty significant difference in approach, and the latter is the one that rarely connects with your readers. So look at how news editors, who are very focused on the people who read them, read their publications, how they're titling and headlining pieces. And ordinarily, when they're covering something like legal news development, they're focusing on the people impacted by that. That's the approach. And what that does is it allows you to call out your audience directly. The most successful content that we see on JD Supra, not from a volume point of view, a credentialing point of view, but actually a growth of business point of view, is the article that calls out the audience and makes it clear what their problem is and how the attorney understands it and what the potential solution is. I mean, it's a direct, explicit versus implicit connection through content. And I'm not sure what else to say, but that's like the golden standard.
You know, I learned there was a secret formula. I didn't know there was a secret formula or that I had cracked the code. But my editor, and I love saying that, it's, you know, total BS, but it's my editor at the New York Times, said to me one day, "You cracked the code." And I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Well, you obviously have done it." And the formula, the code, was that an op-ed piece in either the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or fill in the blank, which should be no more than 750 words, should be 2/3 descriptive of the problem, 1/3 prescriptive. What's the solution? And I think just what you said, Adrian, I mean,
There it is.
there it is. It's a formula, and it works.
Yeah. That's all I've got to say, but Lindsay's about to say something else.
Sure, I will say something else.
Ice cream cone it, baby.
That's right. I think, you know, we talked, one of the things we talked a lot about today is that, you know, when you're a law firm marketer, you're dealing with lawyers, and apologies to Steve, but we all know that it can be a little difficult to deal with lawyers. And it's important to get lawyers on your side, to not be precious about taking the credit, and along with, yes, getting a champion. So all of the things that Adrian and Steve talked about, sometimes obviously you're not the one who is writing or producing the content, but you are the backbone of the firm, and you're the one who's getting it out there, and you might be the one who's trying to push a lot of these changes that we're talking about here. So when you want to make those things happen, the way in which to go about doing that can be things like showing precedent. So, you know, Adrian's talking about showing them other articles, things that other law firms are doing, pointing out the way that you'd like it to be written. Lawyers like to see what other firms have done successfully and how that's impacted those firms successfully. You know, how have they brought in clients by writing, by authoring blogs, by doing successful client alerts, by podcasting, by doing video, and the way in which they've successfully written titles, by writing from the client's perspective. All of those things are really helpful. And if you can get a champion within the firm to help you with that, if you don't need to take the credit for bringing that along, that can be really helpful in getting this to a successful point. Also understanding that it all takes time. We all want this to look like it's, you know, a month from now, we're going to be writing amazing content, putting it out there, bringing in clients tomorrow. I think we all know that that's not realistic. It would be great if we could write one blog post and 500 clients would come in as a result of that. But it's a marathon, not a sprint. Plus, for me, any successful project always takes a couple of years. And so you need to be in it for the long haul and just employ these tactics over and over and over again until they work. And also be where your clients are. So, and that's going to differ from sometimes lawyer to lawyer, sometimes practice area to practice area. But you're going to, as Adrian was saying before, you're going to see that new shiny thing and think, oh my God, we need to use that. It's working for other industries. Sometimes it's even working for other law firms, but you have to make sure that it's the right place for your client base to be in. And so it's the right place for your firm to be in. Figure out why that is, and then sell it to your lawyers, not the other way around.
Yeah.
So starting very broad, right? So you're starting very broad. What is the purpose of the communication? What is the publication that I'm dealing with? Who is my audience? Making sure that you're writing for one audience and not several audiences that you have to pull apart. And prescribing the best practices in terms of, did I bury the lead? Is the title calling out to my audience? Does my audience recognize themselves? Is this something that they can relate to? Am I framing it in problem solution instead of here is what I know, or here is what I've changed. So helping to translate what's happening in legal to the mindset and the mind frame of the audience that you're talking to.
Yeah, there's a but we've been doing this long enough now that everybody understands that thought leadership is a credentialing activity, and at the top of a marketing or sales funnel in terms of broad visibility, to be credentialed means to write something that makes somebody read the piece and say, "Oh, that's a gifted tax attorney." It's become sophisticated enough now. And it's so clear that we're living in the midst of the age of information where people who engage us for service, whether that's buying a car or complex legal service, does research before they get in touch with you. And so much further down the funnel is successful writing that supports not the marketing and the branding and the credentialing, but actual business development. And it's a very tricky thing, but when you put it in the context of storytelling, it's working with an attorney no longer to have them tell the story of how good they are, but to frame what they're doing where it's very, very clear that the people that you're trying to reach recognize themselves in the piece and are compelled. That, everybody talks about calls to action in marketing. That's fine when you want to buy, like a floaty in a pool. You call to action, click the button and buy it. But this kind of work really needs to compel people more than just call to them. And that kind of writing really compels them, and it makes a huge difference. One of the things we also discussed relative to this incredibly important idea of burying the lead is that if writing is a process of discovering your own thinking, most of the attorneys that you might work with stop writing when they get to the most salient point. What I do as an editor, when somebody puts something in front of me, is I go to the last paragraph and try to decide whether or not that is in fact the opening. And often it really is. And to not bury the lead means to find that takeaway and lead with it.
And Steve, you talked a little bit about that as well. You said that you edit, and then you edit.
Rewrite, in my case. I'm going to flip the script a little bit. We are developing this case that we're about to file, and I said to my colleagues, what's the press release that we would write about this case? Because reading the complaint as it's written now, I'm not sure what the story is, and we want the story to get picked up by the media. Right. And if we can't tell it clearly in the complaint, are we going to be able to tell it clearly in a press release? And so we've gone back to the drawing board or to the complaint writing stage on this really important case to say, we're burying the lead here too. The evidence is on the paper, but it's not coming off the page into the reader's mind. We have to do a better job as lawyers telling stories.
Very interesting.
You were about to say something?
I was just going to say that something that Adrian said earlier that I really loved was that what's important about content is that it's able to be shared. And lawyers may write in legalese, and maybe the legal department at a company can understand that, but then they're not going to share it with the rest of the company. So it's important that when you're writing content, producing content, that it's something that the person on the other end who's receiving that wants to pass along to somebody else. I think we all have to remember that our clients on the other side are not always lawyers too. They're HR directors, they're operations people. They're not always going to be executives. Exactly. They're not always going to be people who have a legal background, and they might know the language, or they might be lawyers, and they might just not want to read that legalese. I think we tend to, and lawyers tend to get so entrenched in the law that they feel that everybody knows that language. They don't even think about it when they write. So it's our job as marketers to filter that through, to help them come to a point where they're writing articles that are fit for business people rather than just other lawyers. And I know, I think this is something that most sophisticated marketers know already, but it just bears repeating.
Yeah, there's another aspect to that, sort of building on that. We talked about this briefly in the presentation. One of the things that I see a lot, and it's got to do with the sort of like generalized capturing of legal information without strictly focusing on an audience, where the story is about the fact that an attorney is a good immigration attorney versus the story being about the issues being faced by the ideal client. Happens a lot in immigration writing. So, for example, writing about H-1B visas, a law firm could put out a publication, and I'm sure there are people listening in who have experienced exactly this, writing about, for example, H-1B visas and getting a whole bunch of people asking specific questions, none of them ideal clients because they're individuals looking for H-1B visas, whereas what they really meant to do is reach out to a recruiter or HR manager or somebody in a large hiring capacity or corporation. But that is simply an editorial issue of framing, that they did not frame the piece nor explicitly state in the piece, in the title, in the lead, and everything else, that they were writing for managers, not for individuals trying to get an H-1B visa. It's a simple fix to a ubiquitous problem.
Yeah, I think that's an important takeaway. That's one of my favorite takeaways. I'm sure you all have your favorites, but I think about that all the time. I look at the title. Does my audience know that this is about them? What is the impact on me? It's not just about the law or what happened out in the world, but how does that impact me? What is the purpose, and how do I make sense of that? Yeah. And that's where the thought leadership comes in. Oh, great. I can call you and get the help that I need.
Yeah. What else do you want to talk about? How great Rob is. Rob Cates is a great guy, and you should.
We love Rob. Look at what he's done for LMA. Yeah. Look at what he continues to do for LMA.
Yeah.
Produces these great programs.
Yeah.
We're glad that we were able to bring a little bit of the session into the folks who couldn't be here, unfortunately. And it was great talking to you guys about story.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, thanks for having us.